From the outside, Daniel and Clara Williams were the kind of couple people admired. Their neighbors in Ashford, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, often pointed to them as proof that real love still existed. Daniel, tall, calm, and seemingly dependable, ran a modest but successful hardware store. Clara, graceful yet practical, worked beside him at the shop while managing their home. Together they raised their 16-year-old daughter, Lily, bright, polite, and the embodiment of what a small-town family was supposed to look like. Narrators in documentaries often say it, appearances can be deceiving. And for Clara, that phrase had begun to echo louder with every passing year. At church gatherings, people praised Daniel's steady voice and composed nature. At the shop, he was known as the man who never raised his voice, who always had the right tool or advice. But behind their front door, Clara noticed the silence more than the words. Daniel spoke little, and when he did, there was a coolness to his tone, as if affection were something he carefully measured. One evening, Clara set down 2 cups of tea at the kitchen table. She studied him as he scanned the local newspaper. The sound of the ticking clock filled the room. "Daniel," she said softly, "Lily asked if we could all go out for dinner this weekend, just the 3 of us. She misses spending time together." He didn't look up immediately. Instead, he folded the newspaper with deliberate precision, set it aside, and only then met her eyes. "We're together every day, Clara. At the shop, at home. What more is there?" His words were logical, almost kind, but the absence of warmth stung her. Clara smiled faintly, hiding the sting. "It's different," she replied. "She wants family time. That work." Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping once against the table. "We'll see," he said in that measured way of his that always closed the conversation rather than opened it. Clara lowered her gaze to her untouched tea. She wondered if she was imagining the distance between them, or if it had been there all along. Outside their house, the autumn evening painted the streets gold and red. Neighbors strolled past, waving cheerfully at the lit windows of the Williams home. Convinced the glow meant warmth within, Clara wished they were right. At night, when she lay beside him, she often listened to the rhythm of his breathing. It was steady but never matched hers. It felt like 2 people sharing the same space but living in separate worlds. Lily, in her room across the hall, was still young enough to believe her parents' love was unshakable. Clara sometimes envied her daughter's innocence, and yet Clara stayed silent. She told herself their life was good, that a few unspoken words and a little coldness did not amount to anything more. She had grown skilled at convincing herself that love was measured in stability, not tenderness, but sometimes when she caught Daniel staring out the window late at night, his expression unreadable, she felt an unease she couldn't explain. His eyes seemed to be somewhere else, far beyond their house, far beyond her reach. Years later, investigators would revisit those early signs. They would point to Clara's unease as the first cracks in a carefully constructed facade. For now, however, the Williams family remained the town's picture of perfection. As the days grew shorter and the air colder, Clara folded laundry, prepared dinners, and kept her doubts hidden, all while convincing herself that Daniel's silence was nothing more than a quiet temperament. But deep inside, a voice whispered that there was more to it, and soon that voice would prove right. The unease that had begun to shadow Clara's days did not fade. Instead, it deepened with small discoveries, things that seemed insignificant on their own, but together painted a troubling picture. One late afternoon, while tidying Daniel's study, she noticed something she had never seen before. His desk, always immaculate, had a bottom drawer she had assumed was decorative. Yet when she tugged it, it didn't open. A small brass keyhole glinted under the desk lamp. Clara paused, holding the handle. A locked drawer wasn't unusual in itself, but Daniel was not the type of man who locked things away. He prided himself on transparency, or at least that was the illusion. The thought unsettled her. She bent lower, pulling again, but the drawer remained firm. Her hands lingered longer than they should have, curiosity pulling harder than reason. It was then that Daniel's voice cut through the silence. "Looking for something?" Clara jerked upright, heart racing. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the fading light outside. His expression was unreadable. Calm, perhaps too calm. "I was just dusting," she said quickly, setting aside the rag in her hand. Daniel stepped into the room, his eyes moving from her to the drawer. He smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dusting a locked drawer?" His tone was light, almost playful, but beneath it lay something sharper. Clara forced a laugh. "I hadn't noticed it before. I didn't know it locked." He crossed the room slowly, every step measured. Then, without breaking eye contact, he crouched, tapped the brass keyhole and said, "Every man deserves a private place, Clara. Even in marriage. Don't you think?" His voice was smooth, affectionate on the surface, but it wrapped around her like a noose. Clara nodded, though the unease in her stomach twisted tighter. "Of course," she whispered. "I wasn't prying." Daniel reached up and brushed his hand against her cheek, tender in a way that made her shiver. "You've always trusted me. Don't let your imagination spoil that. You know how people talk in this town. One seed of doubt can ruin everything. Gaslighting works like a shadow, subtle, quiet, convincing you that the darkness is your own creation." In that moment, Clara couldn't tell if she was being unreasonable or if Daniel was deliberately weaving her doubts against her. Still, the drawer haunted her. That night, as they lay in bed, Daniel drifted easily into sleep. Clara stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment in the study. Why would he need to lock anything away? What could be so important, so private that even his wife couldn't see? She turned to face him, the moonlight etching the hard lines of his face. He looked peaceful, almost innocent, but Clara knew. Peace could be a mask, just like a smile could be a weapon. The locked drawer became more than a piece of furniture. It became a boundary, a silent barrier between them, a symbol of something hidden, something waiting. And it was only the beginning. The locked drawer lingered in Clara's thoughts, a silent presence even when she forced herself to smile in front of others. She tried to dismiss it as Daniel had suggested, a husband's private place, nothing more. But in the days that followed, her gaze returned to that drawer again and again, as though it were daring her to keep questioning. Then a week later, something arrived that shattered the fragile calm. It was a plain white envelope slipped through the shop's letterbox. There was no return address, no stamp, as though someone local had placed it there by hand. Clara found it while sorting invoices at the counter. At first glance it seemed unimportant, but when she unfolded the single sheet inside, her hands went cold. The note was typed, the words stark and deliberate. "You don't really know the man you married. His family's blood is not clean. Ask him about the night in 1989. Ask him what he saw." Clara stared at the page, her pulse hammering. 1989. Daniel would have been a boy then, perhaps 12 or 13. What kind of night could this be referring to? And why now, after so many years? Her first instinct was to confront him, but she remembered his eyes in the study, the way he had turned her suspicion back on her, making her feel irrational. She folded the letter quickly and slipped it into her handbag before Daniel returned from the storeroom. "Everything okay?" he asked casually, wiping his hands on a rag. Clara forced a smile. "Just invoices. Nothing urgent." For the rest of the day she kept her composure, but the letter burned in her mind. She thought of the way Daniel avoided talking about his childhood, how he brushed off questions about his parents or his hometown. Clara had assumed it was painful, that silence was his way of protecting old wounds. Now she wondered if silence was a cover. That night, while Daniel slept, she retrieved the letter from her bag and read it again under the glow of her bedside lamp. The phrase "family's blood is not clean" gnawed at her. The words seemed to drip with menace, as though the sender wanted her to picture violence. She tried to recall what little she knew. Daniel's parents had died when he was young. That much he had told her. A car accident, he'd said. But now doubt twisted every memory. Had it really been an accident? In documentaries, these moments are often described as turning points. The instant when a spouse realizes that trust is not the same as truth. Clara had reached that point. Still, she said nothing. At breakfast, Daniel sipped his coffee and read the newspaper, as calm as ever. Clara watched him, searching his face for any sign of guilt, any crack in the facade. There was nothing. He was practiced, perhaps too practiced. "Busy day?" she asked, her voice carefully steady. Just inventory, he replied, glancing at her briefly. We'll close early tonight. Thought I'd make us dinner. It sounded thoughtful, even loving. But the letter lay hidden in her bag, poisoning the normalcy. Later that afternoon, while Daniel was on a supply run, Clara slipped into his study again. She ran her fingers over the locked drawer, heart pounding. If the letter was true, if there was something violent in his past, perhaps the proof was right there, sealed behind brass and wood. But the drawer remained locked. The secret stayed hidden. She told herself she would wait, that she needed more than one anonymous note before tearing her marriage apart. Yet deep down, she knew the investigation had already begun. She was no longer Daniel's trusting wife. She was his silent detective, and what she was about to uncover would cost her more than she could imagine. From the moment the letter entered her life, Clara found it impossible to look at Daniel the same way. His smile, once a comfort, now seemed rehearsed. His calm manner, once admired, felt like a shield. Every word he spoke carried the weight of something unsaid. At first, she tried to act normal, carrying on with her daily routines. But suspicion has a way of gnawing through silence. Clara's glances lingered too long. Her questions carried too much edge. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. One evening while preparing dinner, Clara slipped. She had been watching him peel potatoes, his movements precise and methodical. She remembered the letter's words and asked too casually, "What were you like as a boy, Daniel?" In 1989, the knife stopped mid-slice. He looked at her, not with confusion, but with calculation. His eyes held hers for a moment too long before he answered, "Why do you ask something like that?" His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Clara forced a smile. "Just curious. Lily's been asking about family history for a school project." Daniel's lips curved faintly, though it was not a smile. "Family history is boring, Clara. Dead people and old dates. Nothing worth repeating." He resumed chopping, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Clara swallowed her unease, realizing she had stepped too close to something he wanted buried. Over the following days, Daniel's behavior shifted subtly. He began questioning her more often. Where she went, who she spoke to, how long errands took. At first it came disguised as care. "You shouldn't drive so late," he said when she returned from the grocery store after dusk. "Why was your phone off?" "I tried calling," he asked another afternoon. Soon it no longer sounded like concern. It sounded like control. Clara tried to keep her composure, but their arguments grew sharper. One night after Lily had gone to bed, she confronted him in the living room. "You've been watching me," she said quietly. "Checking my phone, asking about every step I take." "Why?" Daniel set down his glass, his expression cool. "Because I know when something is wrong." "You've been different, distracted. Secrets in marriage are poison, Clara. Tell me what you're hiding." The irony struck her like a slap. She wanted to scream about the letter, the locked drawer, the doubts that haunted her every thought. But fear kept her quiet. Instead, she whispered, "I'm not hiding anything." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Then stop acting like you are." Moments like this transformed their home into a battleground of silences and sharp words. Clara felt herself walking on glass, trying not to trigger the cold fury that simmered just beneath Daniel's polished exterior. And yet, he still knew when to soften. After each clash, Daniel would brush her hand, kiss her forehead, or murmur, "We'll be fine. Clara, we always are." The tenderness felt less like love and more like strategy, a careful balancing act to keep her off-center. Their daughter Lily began to notice. She would pause in doorways, sensing tension, her young eyes darting between her parents. Clara hated the thought of their daughter witnessing the war no one else could see. Still, Clara stayed silent. But inside, suspicion hardened into resolve. If Daniel wanted her to stop acting like she was hiding something, he had no idea how determined she was to uncover what he was hiding. And soon, someone outside their marriage would give her another reason to keep digging. Clara's unease had sharpened into vigilance. Every glance at Daniel, every measured word, every sudden shift in his mood kept her on edge. She told herself she would uncover the truth on her own, but the truth had other plans. It was a gray Thursday morning at the boutique where Clara worked part-time. The shop was quiet, the hum of the air conditioner and the faint scent of fabric softener filling the stillness. Clara was folding scarves when the bell above the door jingled. A man stepped inside. He was in his late 40s, rugged, with tired eyes and clothes that looked worn from too many miles. Clara greeted him politely, expecting a customer, but his eyes locked on her with unsettling purpose. "Clara Williams?" he asked. She stiffened. "Yes, can I help you?" The man hesitated, as though weighing whether to speak. Finally, he said, "I knew your husband. A long time ago, and I need to warn you. He isn't the man you think he is." The words fell like stones. Clara's hands froze on the folded fabric. "Excuse me," she whispered, her throat dry. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're married to Daniel, but Daniel isn't who he pretends to be. His family, they were involved in something violent, and he was there the night it happened." Clara's mind raced. The letter, the locked drawer. Now this stranger's words braided seamlessly into her worst fears. She tried to keep her expression neutral. "You must be mistaken," she said quickly. "My husband runs a store." "He's never," the man shook his head. "I wish I was mistaken, but I knew his father. I knew what went down in 1989. And if Daniel hasn't told you, it means he's hiding something too dark to face." Her heart pounded. "Why are you telling me this?" His gaze softened, almost pitying. "Because I saw what his father did, and I saw how Daniel kept quiet. Silence is as dangerous as blood." Clara struggled for words. "You expect me to believe some stranger who walks into my workplace with stories about decades ago?" The man's jaw tightened. "You don't have to believe me, but you deserve to know why people still whisper about the Williams name back in Hollow Creek. Look it up yourself. You'll find it. The police report, the headlines, the boy who stayed silent." Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. Another customer entered, and the man stepped back, pulling his jacket tighter. He gave Clara one last look, a look heavy with warning, then slipped out the door. For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened as the echoes of his words filled her. The boy who stayed silent. The year 1989. The same year in the letter. She forced herself through the rest of her shift, smiling at customers, folding clothes, her body moving automatically while her mind reeled. That evening, Daniel picked her up from work. He looked calm as always, his hands steady on the steering wheel as he asked about her day. Clara's voice trembled slightly as she replied, "It was fine." She didn't dare mention the man. Not yet, but as she sat beside Daniel in the car, she glanced at him in profile. The strong jaw, the calm eyes, the mask he wore so effortlessly. And for the first time, she wondered if she was safer keeping her knowledge secret than speaking it aloud. Documentary narrators often mark these moments, the intersection of doubt and fear, when the spouse realizes they are no longer living with the person they married, but with a stranger. Clara had reached that crossroads, and she knew the next step she took would decide everything. The drive home that night was suffocating. Clara stared out the window, Daniel's words blurring into background noise. Her mind was still replaying the stranger's warning, the boy who stayed silent. Hollow Creek. 1989. It wasn't just an echo anymore. It was a demand. The moment Daniel kissed her goodnight and disappeared into his office, Clara sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. Her hands trembled as she typed the words into a search bar. Hollow Creek. 989 Williams family. Within seconds, the past began to unfold in front of her. An old newspaper article appeared, grainy and faded. The headline read, "Local man found dead in apparent feud. Family ties suspected." The article spoke of a man named Richard Holloway, found beaten to death in his own barn. Witnesses had linked the crime to Daniel's father, Charles Williams, known for his violent temper and shady dealings. But what chilled Clara most was the last paragraph. A young witness, believed to be Charles Williams's son, was present during the altercation but never testified. The case went cold due to lack of cooperation. Her breath caught. That son could only have been Daniel. She clicked through more reports, each more unsettling. Rumors of bribes, threats against neighbors, and silence. Daniel's silence threaded through it all. Clara leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen as her heart hammered. The man she loved had grown up not just in a troubled family, but in the shadow of murder, and he had chosen silence over truth. The next evening, Clara decided she couldn't carry the weight alone any longer. She waited until Daniel had poured himself a drink and settled on the couch. Daniel, she began softly, can I ask you something about your childhood? He glanced at her, wary. Depends on what you're asking. She took a steadying breath. What happened in Hollow Creek in 1989? With your father? With Richard Holloway. The effect was immediate. Daniel's body stiffened. His glass froze halfway to his lips, then lowered slowly. His eyes, usually calm, flickered with something darker. Where did you hear that name? His voice was low, dangerous. Clara forced herself not to flinch. It doesn't matter. I found the articles. I know your father was accused, and I know you were there. For a long moment, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Then Daniel set the glass down and leaned forward, his expression softening into something almost tender. Clara, he said gently, you don't understand. You don't know what my father was like. I was just a boy. What could I have done? Tears pricked her eyes, but she held his gaze. You could have told the truth. Daniel reached for her hand, his grip firm, almost suffocating. And what would that truth have done? Put my father in prison? Destroyed my family? I was a child, Clara, a terrified child. I did what I had to do to survive. His voice cracked at just the right places, his tone heavy with vulnerability. And for a moment, Clara felt herself wavering. But then his grip tightened. And now you, the woman I love, are throwing this in my face? After everything I've built for us? After the life I've given you? Clara pulled her hand back, her heart pounding. I'm not throwing it in your face. I need honesty. I need to know who I married. Daniel's eyes hardened. You married me, Clara, not my father. Not my past, me. And if you keep digging, you'll destroy everything we have. Is that what you want? His words cut deep, wrapping around her like chains. Love, loyalty, guilt. He twisted them all until Clara couldn't tell where her devotion ended and his control began. Narrators often note these turning points, when the truth surfaces, but the power of manipulation keeps it buried again. Clara had uncovered the bloodline of violence that shaped her husband, but in confronting him, she had walked straight into his trap. That night, as Daniel held her close in bed, whispering reassurances that felt more like warnings, Clara stared into the dark and realized something chilling. Secrets were not just part of his past. They were the currency of his love, and the deeper she sank, the more dangerous it would become to climb back out. At first, Clara thought confronting Daniel had cracked something between them forever. But instead of rage or distance, he shifted. The next morning, he kissed her cheek as she poured coffee, told her she looked beautiful, and asked if she wanted to go out for dinner that weekend. It should have soothed her. Instead, it chilled her, because behind every smile was a flicker of watchfulness. Every gesture of tenderness came paired with an undertone of control. Clara, he said one evening, brushing her hair behind her ear as if she were fragile porcelain, you've been acting distracted. Maybe it's stress, or maybe... His voice dipped, smooth as silk. You've been imagining things, she stiffened. Imagining? Yes. His smile was soft, practiced. Locked drawers, shadows in the past, as it's all in your head. You're chasing ghosts, love, and it's hurting us. Clara opened her mouth to argue, but his hand closed gently over hers, firm enough to silence. Don't you trust me? He whispered. The question sank its claws into her. Because she did trust him, didn't she? Or had she only trusted the man she thought he was? That night he drew her close in bed, stroking her arm with tenderness so convincing it blurred the line between love and suffocation. Clara lay awake, torn between guilt and suspicion. Over the following days, Daniel's strategy became clear. He flooded her with affection, surprise flowers at work, a weekend trip suggestion, long embraces in the kitchen where he murmured that she was his whole world. To anyone else, he was the perfect husband making up for a rocky patch, but every gift carried an invisible hook. When Clara mentioned the newspaper articles again, Daniel's expression faltered for the briefest second before he laughed, pulling her into his chest. My darling, this obsession of yours will drive you mad. Please, for both of us, let it go. The words replayed in her head long after he left the room. This obsession of yours. By the third week, Clara found herself second-guessing everything. She'd reread the articles and wonder if she had exaggerated their weight. She'd recall the stranger's warning but question whether he had simply been mistaken. She'd catch her own reflection in the mirror and whisper, "Am I losing my mind?" And yet deep inside, the unease remained. She noticed Daniel checking her phone when he thought she wasn't looking. She saw how his hand lingered on her shoulder a second too long when she spoke of leaving town for a visit with her sister. He always framed it as concern. "You've been fragile lately. Clara, I just want to protect you," but she couldn't shake the sense that his protection was a... Narrators of such cases often describe gaslighting as a weapon more dangerous than fists. It robs a victim of their own certainty, their own voice. Clara was beginning to feel that theft. On a rain-slick Thursday night, she sat in her car after leaving work, clutching the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed, Daniel asking when she'd be home. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing. For the first time, a thought surfaced that frightened her more than the truth she had uncovered. What if he's right? What if the problem is me? But in the shadows of that thought, another voice whispered back, quieter but stronger. "No, something is wrong. And if you keep doubting yourself, you'll never escape it." Clara drove home, the storm pounding around her, her mind split between fear and clarity. She didn't yet know which voice would win, but the war inside her had only just begun. The storm outside hadn't quieted by morning. Rain streaked down the windows, casting shadows across the Williams home. Clara moved through the kitchen in a daze, Daniel humming to himself in the study, as if nothing in the world was fractured. But their daughter, Lily, had grown restless. 16, sharp-eyed and endlessly curious, she noticed the tension her parents tried to smooth over. She noticed the way her mother's smile seemed forced, the way her father's presence filled a room like heavy smoke. That afternoon, while Daniel was at the store, Lily slipped into his study. She had only intended to borrow a pen. Instead, her gaze snagged on the bottom drawer of his desk. It had always been locked, but now, perhaps by mistake, the key dangled from the lock. Her pulse quickened. With trembling fingers, she turned it. The drawer slid open, revealing a hidden world. Old photographs yellowed at the edges, stacks of documents bound with elastic bands, and a folded newspaper clipping worn soft with age. Lily knelt, her curiosity battling with dread. She picked up the photographs first. A much younger Daniel stared back at her, his face unsmiling, eyes shadowed. Beside him stood a man Lily had never met, hard-faced, looming, unmistakably Daniel's father. And there, in the background of one image, was something she couldn't unsee, a barn marked with the words Hollow Creek Farm. Her hands shook as she reached for the newspaper clipping. "Local man found dead in Hollow Creek feud." Her eyes darted to the names. Charles Williams, suspected. Son present at scene. Case unresolved. The words swam before her. Lily's throat tightened. She shoved the papers back into the drawer and locked it again, her chest rising and falling rapidly. By the time Clara found her that evening, Lily was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as though she'd been crying. "Sweetheart?" "What's wrong?" Clara asked, kneeling by her daughter's bed. Lily hesitated, then whispered, "Mom, who is Richard Holloway?" Clara froze. The name hit her like ice water. "Where did you hear that?" "I saw it," Lily's voice cracked. "In Dad's desk. There were photos, newspapers. He was there, wasn't he? He saw something bad happen. And you've known something was wrong all along." Clara's chest constricted. She tried to steady her voice. "Lily, listen to me. This isn't something you should worry about." "No!" Lily's outburst was sharp, cutting through the air. "You're scared of him, Mom. I can see it. You tiptoe around him like he's dangerous. Aren't you scared he'll hurt us?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She reached for her daughter's hands, squeezing them tightly. "I don't want you carrying this. You're too young." "I'm not too young," Lily interrupted, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "I'm old enough to know when someone's lying to me. If Dad's hiding something this big, then we're not safe, are we?" Clara's throat closed. For weeks she had convinced herself she could endure Daniel's manipulation, his charm laced with venom. But now, looking into her daughter's terrified eyes, she felt the weight of every choice pressing down on her. She couldn't pretend anymore. Clara pulled Lily into her arms, holding her close as if she could shield her from the truth itself. "You're right," she whispered hoarsely. "You're right. I should have told you. There are things about your father, things I didn't want to believe. But now you've seen it too. Lily clung to her mother, her body shaking. What are we going to do? Clara kissed the top of her daughter's head, her own tears spilling freely. We're going to be careful. We're going to stay quiet. And we're going to find a way out. I promise you that. The promise hung heavy between them. Both fragile and desperate. Narrators of stories like these often note the pivotal moment when denial collapses, when the hidden truth seeps into the lives of those most innocent. For Clara, Lily's discovery was more than confirmation. It was a warning, because now Daniel's secret didn't just belong to her. It belonged to their daughter, too, and that made the danger impossible to contain. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the sound of Daniel's steady breathing beside her. Lily's words echoed in her mind. Aren't you scared he'll hurt us? For the first time, Clara admitted the answer to herself. Yes. The house felt heavier with every passing day. Clara moved through it cautiously, always aware of Daniel's watchful eyes, always aware of Lily's fear. Their daughter's discovery had shattered any illusions Clara had clung to. Now she wasn't just surviving for herself, she was protecting Lily, and that meant she needed proof. Late one night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Clara retrieved the small digital recorder she kept for work notes. She tucked it into her robe pocket, the weight of it pressing against her like both a weapon and a lifeline. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Daniel sat in his study the following evening, sipping bourbon, the glow of his desk lamp throwing sharp shadows across his face. Clara stood in the doorway, forcing herself to look calm. Daniel, she said softly, I've been thinking. About your father. About Hollow Creek. His jaw tightened, though he didn't look up. I told you to stop digging. I'm not digging, Clara lied, her thumb brushing against the recorder in her pocket. I want to understand. I want to know what you went through. At that, his eyes flicked to hers, searching. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as though weighing her sincerity. Then slowly he exhaled. You think you want to know, he murmured. But the truth isn't something you can carry easily, Clara. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Tell me anyway. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he reached for the bourbon again, swirling it idly. My father killed Richard Holloway. That much the papers got right. But what they didn't write, what no one ever knew, was that I was there when it happened. I saw it. I saw my father beat him until he stopped moving. Clara's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression still. I didn't testify, Daniel continued, his voice low, almost confessional. I told the police I remembered nothing. My father made sure of that. He told me that family comes before everything. That silence is loyalty, and so I stayed silent. I carried it for him. For us. He leaned forward, his eyes dark and intense. And now you want to drag it all up again. For what? To ruin me? To tear apart this family? Clara's hand pressed against the recorder in her pocket, the red light blinking unseen. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I just needed to hear it from you. Daniel rose suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor. You needed to hear it? His voice rose, sharp and dangerous. After everything I've done for you, after building this life, you sit there and demand confessions like some interrogator? Clara took a step back, but he closed the space between them in an instant. His hands gripped her shoulders, hard enough to bruise. You think you can judge me? You don't know what it was like living under that man. You don't know what survival meant. Daniel, you're hurting me, Clara whispered, her voice trembling. His eyes flickered, and not with remorse, but with something closer to desperation. You're mine. Clara, you and Lily. And I won't let anyone, not the police, not strangers, not even you, take this life away from me. Before Clara could respond, Lily's voice rang out from the hallway. Dad, Daniel turned sharply. Lily stood frozen, her wide eyes locked on them. Clara twisted free of his grip, rushing to shield her daughter. Go to your room, Lily, Clara ordered, her voice breaking, but Daniel's rage was already spilling over. No, she stays. She should know what loyalty looks like. The storm that had been brewing for weeks finally broke. Clara pushed Lily behind her, her own fear igniting into something fierce. We are not your prisoners, Daniel. Not anymore. The words seemed to snap something in him. He lunged, grabbing Clara's wrist, But in the struggle, his glass slipped from the desk, shattering against the hardwood. Shards glittered like knives across the floor. Clara's free hand closed around one. She didn't think. She acted. The sharp edge sliced across his arm as she swung, and Daniel roared in pain, staggering back. Blood splattered onto the carpet, vivid against the pale beige fibers. For a moment, the house went silent, but for the sound of their ragged breathing. Clara stared at the crimson stain spreading across Daniel's sleeve, her own hand trembling, the shard falling from her grasp. Lily's sobs filled the air behind her. Daniel's eyes, dark and wild, locked onto hers. But for the first time, Clara didn't look away. Narrators often describe this point in stories as the breaking of the cycle, when fear transforms into defiance, and silence shatters under the weight of survival. Clara knew this was only the beginning of what would come, but as Daniel clutched his bleeding arm, she felt a shift inside her. The illusion of safety was gone. What remained was raw, dangerous truth, and truth had drawn blood. The sound of sirens split the night. Blue and red lights bled through the curtains, flashing across the walls like restless ghosts. Clara sat on the living room floor, her arms wrapped around Lily, who clung to her as though letting go would mean slipping into some deeper nightmare. Daniel lay slumped against the wall, his shirt darkened by blood from the gash in his arm. He wasn't dead. His breaths came in jagged pulls, his glare still sharp despite his weakness. When the police stormed inside, Clara didn't move. She couldn't. Her body shook with the tremors of what had just transpired, the broken glass still glittering on the carpet between them like evidence of their unraveling. "Ma'am, step aside," one officer commanded. Clara obeyed numbly, pulling Lily toward the kitchen. She listened as orders were barked, as Daniel cursed and resisted before finally being subdued. The clink of handcuffs snapped through the house, final and undeniable. It was over. Or at least the violence was. But what followed was its own storm. Detectives swarmed the house, photographing the scene, collecting the shards of glass, noting the blood trails. Clara gave her statement with a hollow voice, recounting Daniel's confession, the threat, the struggle. Every word left her mouth like ash. The recorder, still hidden in her robe pocket, was handed over as evidence. The detectives' faces shifted as they listened to Daniel's own voice confessing to his father's crime, to his silence, to the legacy of violence that had shaped their marriage. The truth, once buried, now had weight. In the days that followed, the documentary-style narration framed Clara's story as one of survival and tragedy intertwined. Viewers heard how she had endured years of subtle control, how the facade of the perfect couple masked a lineage of blood and silence. They saw images of Daniel's father, Charles Williams, resurrected from old files, a man whose brutality cast a long shadow across decades. And then they saw Clara, pale, haunted, sitting in a quiet interview room as she tried to put words to the storm inside her. "I loved him," she whispered to the camera, her hands twisting in her lap. "I loved the man I thought he was. But the truth was something darker. It wasn't just his secret. It became mine, too. I kept it, I carried it, and in the end I almost let it destroy us." Her voice broke. "I'll never forgive myself for waiting until it was too late. Until our daughter had to see what kind of man her father really was." The camera lingered on her face, raw and trembling, before cutting to footage of Lily. The teenager sat stiffly, her eyes tired. Her words simple but searing. "I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of the glass breaking. Or the blood, or how scared Mom looked. He was supposed to protect us. Instead, he made us afraid in our own home." Experts offered commentary throughout the reconstruction, psychologists explaining gaslighting, detectives highlighting the dangers of buried family crimes, sociologists pointing to the cycle of violence passed down from one generation to the next. Daniel himself never spoke on camera again. Footage showed him escorted into the courthouse, his expression stone hard, his silence echoing the same choice he made as a boy, to withhold, to conceal, to bury truth under loyalty twisted into chains. The verdict was clear. With the recording and Clara's testimony, the case against him was undeniable. Justice at last had broken through. But justice came with its own cost. Clara returned to the family home weeks later to collect what little she and Lily would take with them. The house felt alien, every room stained by memory. In the study, she paused by the locked drawer, now empty. It struck her that the drawer had been the beginning, the first crack in the facade. And it was the place she would never forget. She closed it softly, then turned to leave, Lily's hand in hers. Narrators closed the documentary with words that hung heavy. When a family secret festers long enough, it doesn't just remain in the past. It seeps into love, into blood, into every corner of life, until it explodes. For Clara and Lily, survival meant sacrifice. And though truth brought justice, it also stole innocence that could never be returned. As the final shot faded to black, Clara's voice lingered over the silence. Secrets don't just live in drawers. They live in people, and sometimes the cost of opening them is blood. The camera lingers on Clara's face, framed in muted light. Her voice, low and steady, carries the weight of everything that has come before. "When I married Daniel," she begins, "I thought I knew him better than anyone else ever could. We shared a home, a child, a life. But the truth is, you can spend years sleeping beside someone and never really know the shadows they carry." Her words settle like smoke. The screen fading to black and white images. Daniel and Clara on their wedding day. Lily as a baby in Clara's arms. Family portraits that once seemed so ordinary. But shadows don't stay buried forever, Clara continues. They creep out in moments of silence, in words unspoken, in secrets locked away. And when they finally surface, they can tear everything apart. The narrative shifts, cutting to footage of the house. The shattered glass on the carpet, the blood-stained sleeve, the drawer that had hidden decades of silence. Detectives recount how Daniel's confession exposed not just his father's crime, but the way trauma and loyalty twisted down through generations. One investigator's voice echoes, "Children inherit more than names. Sometimes they inherit burdens too heavy to carry, and if they stay silent long enough, those burdens spill into the lives of everyone around them." The screen returns to Clara. She looks tired, but her voice sharpens with resolve. "I don't hate him," she admits. "I hate what he became. I hate what his silence turned him into. But most of all, I hate that I let it go on as long as I did. That I let Lily grow up in a home where fear dressed itself as love." Lily's interview follows, her young voice trembling but steady. "I don't think I'll ever forget it." The sound of him yelling, the look in Mom's eyes. It's not something you can unsee. It's not something you can ever forgive. The documentary weaves their voices together, underscored by a quiet, haunting score. It becomes less about Daniel's crime and more about the fragile line between intimacy and danger. How the person closest to you can also be the one who destroys you. Clara's final narration begins over a slow montage of empty rooms, the quiet kitchen table, the staircase worn by years of footsteps, Lily's childhood bedroom. People ask me if I ever really loved him. The answer is yes. I loved the man I thought he was. But love without truth is just a lie dressed in tenderness, and lies, no matter how carefully hidden, always leave scars. Some on your heart, some on your skin, and some that echo in your child's eyes. She pauses. The silence stretches. When I look back now, I realize it wasn't just his father's crime that haunted us. It was the silence that followed. Silence is what keeps violence alive. And silence was what almost destroyed us. The final scene returns to Clara and Lily walking away from their old home for the last time. Their hands are clasped, their faces resolute. But the weight of loss is unmistakable. The narrator's closing words seal the story. When a family secret ends in blood, it doesn't vanish with the arrest or with the verdict. It lingers in the survivors, echoing through every choice they make, every trust they give, every love they dare to hold again. Because the question that remains is the most haunting of all. How well can we ever truly know the person we love? The screen fades to black,